To finish the business logic, we will implement the last endpoint named endRound. This one will finalize the current round of a game and the game itself if it's the last round. Just like other implementations, we will create some data types, a couple of helper functions that will assist in the endpoint's logic. So as for endRound, this endpoint will receive the game ID and the user's answer to the quiz. It will return the correct answer and flag with the end of game condition. So we are going to be creating two new data types, one with the received parameter and another for the returned information. For the entry parameter, we will call it endRound params. As for the response, it will be named endRound response. As for the three helper functions, this one will update the game score when the round is over. The second one will calculate the total game time, adding the elapsed time of each round. And the third and final helper will update the game table with the end of games information. We will start with update endRound game score. That receives the game ID and the achieved score by the end of the round. The implementation is very simple. We just need to fetch the game and add to the score the value on the parameter. Finalizing the function with an update on the game table with the new score. Next, we have getTotalTime helper. This function will start from a game ID and returns the added time for each round associated with the game. To do this, we will call the function RDSSelect1 that can return either a register or a calculated value. In this example, we will call the rounds table and ask for the sum of the elapsed times using as the filter condition the game ID we got from the parameter. The last of the helper functions, endgame, will update a game when a game over occurs with the final date and time and the total elapsed time. We add the total time on a variable called total time using the function we just created. We update the game with the final date and time and the total time we just calculating using as the filter the game ID. We are now ready to build the end round endpoint. This function will use the types we just created receiving end round params as the entry parameter, and it will return an object of type end round response. We configure the routing and the parameter binding just like the ones we did before. This time around, we do not have a game ID directly, but instead we get an object parameter called endRoundParams binded in the body of the HTTP request. As for remarks, we are going to write finish the current round and returns the correct answers. And the remarks for the parameter will be end round parameter, game ID, and user answer. As for the implementation, we start by creating a variable called response of type end round response that will be later returned by the function. We need another one to store the current round. We will call it current round of type round. The first step will be to extract the last ongoing round, and if we find nothing, we will throw an exception. Now we extract the associated quiz to the round on a variable named quiz of type quiz. We check that the round is not yet over, since we can only finalize a round that is still ongoing. We use a Boolean variable named was correct where we are going to store if the answer was correct or not. And to evaluate this condition, we check the user answer against the one we received on the parameters. Now let's update the current round, the endTime property with the current date and time. And mark whether the answer was correct or not. And finally, an execute blocky with the update on the round. We use the function called updateRound with the round ID and the object with the updated fields of the round. Now to update the game score with the score obtained in this round, we create a partial score that will represent the score obtained on the round. This logic is very simple. We initialize it with a 0 and we assign a 1 if the answer was correct. Finally, we update the game score with the obtained score at the end of the round. We will call the helper update end round game score. The next step will be to test whether the game is over or not, and if it's over, we need to mark the end of the game. Let's create a new Boolean variable that will store the condition, checking for the total number of rounds to be equal or more to the total rounds per game. If the game is over, we will call the endgame helper function. Lastly, we will fill the return object with the corresponding values, the correct answer of the quiz, and whether the game is over. With all of this logic, we are done and we are ready to test the endpoint. Once we are done with the implementation of the endpoint, we will test its functionality. We execute the solution, clicking on the run, and open a file with the different tests. The first thing we are going to do is to create a new game and start a new round. We are going to cheat a little bit here and see the correct answer for the quiz to see what we get when we look at the game. We obtain the quiz ID associated to the round 1, and we can see that it is the quiz number 101. Searching for this quiz, we can obtain the correct answer, in this case the second one. Now to finalize the round, we pass the game ID number 1 and the 2 as the answer, which we know is the correct one. The microservice will indicate that the correct answer was indeed the second one, and also that the game is not over. We are going to play a couple of rounds, starting and finalizing rounds to test how the microservice behaves. We start a new round and we can query for the answer. And as you can see, the game is not yet over and that the current score is a 1. The round number is the second and the total number of rounds are 5, and that this is a new quiz. From now on, we will not be cheating anymore and always play with the response number 1. We finalize the round and we can see that the correct answer was the 4th this time. We start a new round and we can see that we have a score of 1. We are at round number 3 and we are offered a new question. We finalize this round and we can see that the answer was correct, so we should now have a score of 2. Starting another round and see that the score is 2, the round number is a 4, and that the total number of rounds is 5, which comes from the config parameter. We are offered a different quiz and we finish the round. We lost the round this time, but the game is not yet over. We should be on the last round, and if we play, we would see that the correct answer was the 4th, failing again, and now the game is over. If we start a new round, we are prompted, the round is the 6th, and since this number is bigger than the maximum of 5, we are not offered a new quiz. Also, we can see that the game is over with a score of 2. We can check for this with the game state function, passing over the game ID of 1, and we can see the answer is the same. We are now going to query for all the played rounds to see how the player has been performing, checking against the stored answers in the rounds table. We can see all the played quizzes, the date and time of each one, and if the answer was correct or not. We can check the game and obtain the total time that was calculated on the last round. And we can also see the total score and the flag indicating the game is over. This should be enough to test our microservice since we checked for all the endpoints.